Good afternoon. Good afternoon. As you see, the acoustic in here is pretty wonderful and lively. The musicians tend to love it, the speakers not quite as much. One has to learn to speak in space like this. Thank you for being prompt and welcome to Emmanuel Chapel. It's a beautiful space and I hope you'll be able to see the screens. We just turned the lights off so that you could see the slides as well as possible. This session focuses on the achievements of the Hymnal 82 and its supplements. And so I present to you Bill Roberts and Marilyn Haskel.
Thank you. My happy task is to shine a spotlight on the successes of the Hymnal 1982, an assignment I accepted with relish because after nearly 33 years using it, I am an ardent advocate of this hymnal. What I'd like to do is to acknowledge members of the editorial committee for this hymnal. Some of you will recognize names in this list, while others will hear them perhaps for the first time. Ray Glover is fond of saying to me, there were giants in those days. Yes, I respond, and in some cases, you helped to create those giants by giving them a giant task. That is to say, some of the names were already known in the worlds of poetry and hymnody and liturgics, while others became recognizable because of their work on the Hymnal 1982. Several have gone to the bosom of Abraham, others are still among us. Here they are: Jeffrey Butcher, Charles J. Child Jr., Robert Cochran, Elizabeth Morris Downey, Carol Morey Foster, Raymond F. Glover, General Editor, Jerry D. Godwin, Eric S. Greenwood, William M. Hale, Marion Hatchett, David Hurd, Roy F. Keel, James H. Litton, Richard T. Prue, Arthur Ray, Walter Reiter, Russell Schultz Whitmar, Frederick P. Williams, and Alec Whiten. The preface to the book also acknowledges the work of important consultants: Carl P. Daw Jr., who's here with us, Georgia Joyner, Marilyn J. Kaiser, Ann K. LaCroix, J. Waring McCready, James Tucker, and John E. Williams Jr. It's quite a list, and we're indebted to them not only for their vision, but also for thousands of combined hours of volunteer work. Even though I didn't contribute to the 1982 hymnal, it's my team's songbook, and so I hate to brag publicly about it. Instead, I'm going to turn to what is always a good source, a Lutheran. Composer and educator Carl Schock published an article about the 1982 in the April '87 issue of The Hymn, the Journal of the Hymn Society in the US and Canada. Schock begins by praising the predecessor of the 1982, the Hymnal 1940, which he calls, quote, without a doubt, the most influential hymnal yet published in America, end quote. After more words of praise for the 1940, Schock says this of the 1982. The Hymnal 1982, under the general editorship of Raymond F. Glover, stands as a monumental achievement which will surely do for the coming generation what the Hymnal 1940 did for a previous generation, end quote. The commission comprised not only brilliant practitioners of their various arts, but they also seemed like a lot of fun. Here's a story Carl Daw told me. Several times the commission would have a wonderful Latin or Greek hymn and wish that they had a translation of it. Now you have to remember that there were people like Charles Price and Bland Tucker in the room. And so in fact, and Jim alluded to this earlier, in fact sometimes they'd go to their room on this campus or wherever they were And overnight, they would write it, and the next morning they would appear with something like a new translation of the Phos Hilaron, O gracious light, Lord Jesus Christ. Well, one day they were talking about saints for which hymns were needed, and they were wishing for all the world that they had a hymn for St. Bartholomew. Now, the problem is that we don't know very much about Bartholomew. So if you approach a poet and you say to her, we really want a hymn about St. Bartholomew, she's naturally going to say, well, what do you know? And you're going to have to say, well, hardly anything. So they kind of gave up on that. But Bland Tucker, undeterred, went to his room that night, and the next morning he said, I think I've got it. With wide eyes, they shouted, what is it? You've got a hymn for St. Bartholomew? He says, yes. And he begins with solemn voice. O blessed St. Bartholomew, how little do we know of you. Now you can sing that to the Tomb Gardener, and we're going to do that. And again. So Benjamin Straley, next time at the cathedral we come to St. Bartholomew's Day, you've got it made. The Hymnal Commission developed 5 objectives early in its work. They are such lofty but practical goals that they bear repeating and emulating. Here they are. To prepare a body of text which presents the Christian faith with clarity and integrity. 2, to restore music which has lost some of its melodic, rhythmic, or harmonic vitality through prior revision. 3, to reflect the nature of today's church by including the works of contemporary artists and works representing many cultures. 4, to strengthen ecumenical relationships through the inclusion of text and tunes used by other Christian traditions. 5, to create a hymnal embodying both practicality and aesthetic excellence. Schock says this hymnal, like any other, must be judged on the basis of its objectives and by anyone's standards. It meets them exceedingly well. What are some of the specific achievements we might mention? Well, first of all, the look of the page is clean and uncluttered. The 1940 had the number at the upper left, then a category like Holy Communion in Old English font, centered at the top of the page, beneath which came the poetic meter, then at the left margin, the name of the tune, and at the right margin, the composer's name. At the bottom of the page was the source of the text. The 1982 hymnal has only the number and the category at the top of the page. The rest of the information is at the bottom in a font that looks about 8-point. Another significant change was that while the 1940 used a great deal of white note notation, the 1982 moved to the easier to read black note notation. This probably served to speed up the tempos in many cases. A quarter note just looks faster than a half note. As far as the Commission's choice of hymns, people reported that they found the selection solidly based on a common repertoire of well-known hymns. Most choirmasters were savvy enough to point out to their people what was familiar in the new hymnal. One choirmaster we encountered, however, when we were doing workshops in Southern California on the new hymnal opined, "My congregation has not received the hymnal very well." Well, we asked, what exactly are you doing to introduce it? Easy, he says. Every Sunday I try to show them all the wonderful new hymns in this book. We said, no, please show them, first of all, that all their favorite treasures are in there. Sing Amazing Grace, and then maybe 6 months from now, they'll be open to one new hymn. Through careful polling of priests, musicians, and congregations, the commission first found what was working. Which hymns do you sing? The amalgamated results yielded the basic corpus of the book, which is to say, hymns already proven trustworthy and effective. Most of the hymns in the 1982 were in the 1940, about 60%. The 1982 increased the text of beloved hymnists. Isaac Watts' entries nearly doubled. Charles Wesley's increased by 78%. Martin Luther's tripled. George Herbert's doubled. John Mason Neal's increased by 84%. F. Bland Tucker saw his number of hymns quadrupled. Tucker, as Jim mentioned, by the way, this morning, was the only person who was on both the commission for the 1940 hymnal and the 1982 hymnal. Early American and Southern folk hymns increased exponentially. It's hard to imagine that some of these hymns had never been in an Episcopal hymnal. Come Thou Fount, Amazing Grace, What Wondrous Love. The commission mined early hymnals like the Southern Harmony, Sacred Harp, Kentucky Harmony, and Virginia Harmony for riches such as the tunes Holy Manna and Bourbon. Here then was a hymnal, not a hymnal primarily for Anglophiles and English expats, but a genuinely American hymnal that incorporated English treasures, like hymn 432, which we'll sing one verse of now. 432. Fabulous singing. It's great. Sounds also like an conference. When Were You There appeared in the 1940s, this was the first time that a mainline denominational hymnal included a Negro spiritual. The 1940, having stuck a toe in the water, was followed by the deep plunge by the 1982. Suddenly we have Let Us Break Bread Together on Our Knees, Go Down Moses, There Is a Balm in Gilead, and Go Tell It on the Mountain, among others. I'm fond of telling our students that Negro spirituals, born of inhuman hardship and cruelty, represent the finest folk songs ever created on these shores. We might wish for even more Negro spirituals in the hymnal, but what we got was a vast improvement. Let's sing one stanza of 676. On the refrain, please just keep going straight from refrain to verse. Here we go. Other cultural groups got a smaller representation, but at least they were present, demonstrating that the complexion of the Episcopal Church in the U.S. was changing. There was a Latino folk song, an African song, work song, a Dakota Indian chant, among others. For many years, Ray Glover did a guest lecture in my liturgical music classes, so the students got only not the thrill of meeting Ray, the editor of the hymnal, but they got to ask him questions. One of my favorite questions of Ray was, if you were doing this hymnal today, what would be different? Without hesitating, he said, it would have a lot more Latino hymns. In those days, he said, the demand was not very great, and we simply didn't have access to a lot of material. But who in the 1970s could have predicted that Spanish-speaking population in North America would burgeon by the turn of the 21st century? Let's sing number 113, one verse of 113. Canon Winford Douglas in the 1940s had shepherded the use of plain song, and the 1982 continued to recover the tradition. The new book nearly doubled the number of plain songs from 32 in the 1940 to 60 in the 1982. In addition, the 1982 newly included 11 chants in proportional rhythm and 2 chants in rhythmic modes. German chorales of the 16th and 17th centuries proliferated. There came more Bach harmonizations and the inclusion of several chorales in their original rhythmic versions. The hymnal expanded our repertoire by moving both forward and backward in time. Just as now we have more Greek and Latin texts, more plain song and more chorales, we also have marvelous new texts and tunes. New texts appeared by significant hymnists like Brian Wren, Eric Routley, Jaroslav Vaida, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and W.H. Auden. Karl Daw made his entrance onto the stage of hymnody with what are now classics, like the Murmur of the Dove Song and O Day of Peace That Dimly Shines, becoming the most distinguished hymnist of his generation. Let's sing one verse of 513. Tunes and settings abound by the contemporary composers of the era: Peter Cutts, Richard Dirksen, Gerald Neer, Betty Pulkingham, Jane Marshall, and what were then significant new voices, Calvin Hampton and David Hurd. Except for Vaughan Williams, David Hurd has more tunes in the book than any other composer. We lost Calvin to AIDS in 1984, depriving the church of many more years of his brilliant writing. Let's turn to the fabulous tune, St. Helena at 469, and sing one verse of that. Let's turn for a moment to risks. This hymnal attempted not only to be pastoral, but also to be prophetic with regard to both text and tunes. Some years ago, Carol Doran and I were applying to the Louisville Institute for a grant, and a senior staff member said something to us I have never forgotten. He said, unless we make some bad grants every year, we figure that we're not taking enough risks. Isn't that a stunning philosophy? Risk is built into the process. The commission did take some risks. Some of them caught on and some didn't, like the tunes of William Albright. Some got a lot of use in the beginning, but have fallen away, like the ragtime tune, Look There the Christ Our Brother Comes to Petrus, or the schmoozy dissonant chords of Father We Thank Thee to Albright. I want to suggest that that's okay. I'd far rather have a hymnal that tried some slightly outrageous paths than one that stuck only to the safe roads. We haven't even mentioned service music, but that's another consultation. In conclusion, this hymnal was and is a magnificent piece of work, one that has had a profound impact on our church as well as other denominations. I, for one, hope that whenever a new hymnal is assembled, it has a bit of the vision, the ambition, the risk, the scholarship, the musicianship, the poetic imagination, the historic and contemporary perspective, and above all, the faithfulness of the Hymnal 1982. To the Commission and its consultants 32 years later, we say, well done, good and faithful servants.
In the years following the 1985 publication of the Hymnal 1982, numerous supporting materials were published to assist the professional musician, the clergy, and anyone involved in planning of music and worship. Among those materials were the liturgical index, the scriptural index, simplified accompaniments, the hymnal study series, especially the 2 volumes of An Organist's Guide to Resources for the Hymnal 1982, the Anglican Chant Psalter, the Plainsong Psalter, and the 4 volumes of the Hymnal 1982 Companion. These materials supplied invaluable and vital information and resources for the informed use of the hymnal. For this survey, I will be discussing supplements which were collections of hymns and service music published 10 years after the General Convention approved the texts of the hymnal. These materials were all mandated by confirmed resolutions at various General Conventions. The resulting work consisted of projects for the volunteers of the Standing Commission on Church Music, SCCM, which after 1997 was combined with the Liturgical Commission and became the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music, SCLM. Running parallel to the development of the hymnal supplements was a specialized hymnal project. A resolution at the 68th General Convention in 1985 asked that the SCCM, in cooperation with the Hispanic Desk, the Synod of the Ninth Province, and other appropriate bodies, prepare and produce a comprehensive Spanish language hymnal. Could you do one more slide, whoever's sliding? There you go. El Hymnario was not a translation of the Hymnal 1982, but a complete compilation of hymns, songs, choruses, psalms, and service music appropriate for Hispanic congregations. It was published in 1998, 13 years after the initial legislation. The lengthy process of compiling El Hymnario was the result of good faith efforts by the SCCM, an incomplete understanding of the complexity of Hispanic congregations, and competing factions within various constituencies within the church at the time. These factors created what I call a perfect storm that inundated the project for a time. Ultimately, it was revived by the Hispanic Desk as an ecumenical collaboration between the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, and the United Church of Christ. Unfortunately, the hymnal was never embraced fully by the various Hispanic communities awaiting its publication. Today, a portion of it survives as selections of the most useful pieces in text-only form. At the 70th General Convention in 1991, just 6 years after the publication of the Hymnal 1982, the SCCM was directed to, quote, prepare supplements to the Hymnal 1982, which will provide this church with additional service music, inclusive language hymnody, additional texts in languages other than English, including texts printed in more than one language, excuse me, additional hymnody related to the lectionary and rites of the Book of Common Prayer, and texts and tunes written since the compiling of the present hymnal, unquote. One might ask why General Convention saw fit to pass such a resolution so soon after the 82. A clue lies in 3 other resolutions passed at the same convention. It is important to note that a church-wide focus called the Decade of Evangelism, which was the 1990s, came out of the Anglican Communion Lambeth Conference of 1988. The 3 resolutions were part of the American Church's participation in this program of evangelism. First, there was a resolution emphasizing the need for the contemporary church to share the good news, acknowledging that this requires a great diversity of musical styles. The resolution wording encouraged dioceses, congregations, in response to the Decade of Evangelism, to explore and use a variety of musical resources appropriate to their situation and congruent with the scriptures and the Book of Common Prayer. Second, a recommendation within a resolution from the Standing Commission on Evangelism affirmed that music is a vital part of our worship life and called for special attention to the needs of small congregations and ethnic communities for enhancing music ministry. In the third resolution, the convention endorsed the musical resource Come Celebrate, developed by the Community of Celebration, to be a significant and valuable contribution to the musical and liturgical life of the Episcopal Church. These resolutions indicate a change in historic legislative practice with regard to music. That is, by endorsing a collection of songs for use in the church that was not developed through the Standing Commission, and generally recommending the use of a variety of music resources without being specific to their source. This opened the door for less ecclesial oversight of music in the Episcopal Church. Yes, these developments were a product of the times, but they also represent a desire to offer music with broad appeal to the diversity within the church. This brief historic overview sets the stage for a look at the last 20 plus years of what I am calling the age of congregational music diversity. The contemporary church has experienced an availability of a wide variety of music as a result of the legislative, sociological, and theological movements just described. The first supplement of the Hymnal 1982 was Lift Every Voice and Sing Too, published in 1993. Its title indicates that it was a revision of an earlier supplement. The 1988 General Convention passed a resolution that the SCCM, in cooperation with the Office of Black Ministries, be directed to prepare a collection of Black hymns for use in this church. That book contains Negro spirituals, traditional and contemporary gospel songs, adapted Protestant hymns, missionary and evangelistic hymns, service music, and mass settings in both traditional and gospel styles. It has had widespread acceptance as a beloved resource for the whole church. The 185 songs, hymns, and spiritual songs in Wonder, Love, and Praise, the second supplement, sought to address the laundry list of the 1994 resolution. Additional service music. Wonder, Love, and Praise contains 72 new pieces for all parts of the Mass and new settings of canticles. Inclusive language hymnody. When the SCCM considered new text, we requested word changes or dismissed a hymn if language was an issue. Translations of ancient texts were found that presented no problem with inclusive language. There are expanded images for God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Consider the hymn, God the Sculptor of the Mountains. Texts included by living hymn writers offered a refreshing palette of poetry. For example, this text by British clergyman and poet Colin Hodgetts. These three are the treasures to strive for and prize. Be gentle, live simply, and have the humility to shy from the struggle to put oneself first. These are the pearls. Another category on the list. Hymns with texts other than English and some printed in more than one language. 19 songs new to the Episcopal Church in a variety of other languages were forthcoming. The languages used were Hawaiian, Mandarin, Spanish, Latin, Hebrew, and Zulu. Additional hymns for the lectionary and rites of the BCP. Wonder, Love, and Praise added 4 new Advent texts, additional texts for the Triduum, text with an expanded understanding of the Trinity, 2 metrical versions of the Apostles' Creed, more baptism hymns, texts about Christian pilgrimage, world peace, and 25 spiritual songs, which in the mid-90s was an emerging form of simple songs sung repeatedly, which served to encourage the reluctant singer. And finally, texts and tunes written since the publication of the Hymnal 1982. Wonder, Love, and Praise includes music by 66 living composers who were not in the 82, and 11 living text writers who are now household names. Unfortunately, General Convention did not approve a modest budget request to fund the introduction of Wonder, Love, and Praise. Exploration of its richness has happened where the local musician has found the gems and taught them successfully. A few of the most popular are We Are Marching in the Light of God, Give Thanks for Life, The Church of Christ in Every Age, Lord, you give the Great Commission offered with its original tune, Abbott's Lay. The Korean hymn, Come Now, O Prince of Peace. If you believe and I believe, from Zimbabwe, and the Hispanic, Cuando el Pobre. These are being sung not only in the Episcopal Church, but also in multiple denominations. The text, As Newborn Stars Were Stirred to Song by Carl Daw, set to the tune Alexandra by California composer John Hurton, can stand beside any beloved hymn in the 82 or the 40. The third supplement is Voices Found, which was proposed by the SCCM at General Convention in 1997 and approved. Again, however, there was no funding. The Women's Sacred Music Project, an incorporated public charity, acted as agents for the commission, assisted by Diocese of Pennsylvania Communications, many volunteers, and with some funding from the Congregational Ministries budget at the Church Center. Voices Found was published in 2003 as a collection of hymns and spiritual songs by, for, and about women. It grew naturally out of the worship experiences of a group of lay women at St. Mark's, Philadelphia, who used the newly authorized supplemental liturgical texts and wanted to explore hymns and songs by women. In 1997, the work of such writers was available, but not yet represented in Episcopal materials. Mary Louise Pringle, who's here, Hildegard of Bingen, Sister Elise, Andrea Clearfield, Louisa Cruz, Emma Lou Deemer, Bernadette Farrell, Deborah Friedman, Carol Gallagher, Susan Hellauer, Anna Hernandez, Sharon Hershey, Ray Whitney, Dorothy Papadakis, Alice Parker, and Ann Quigley, to name a few. Voices Found introduced the church to a broader field of women artists. The last supplement, coming from the Standing Commission, was 2 volumes of canticles and settings for the Eucharist using texts from the Enriching Our Worship series of supplemental liturgical materials. Enriching Our Music 1 and 2 were published in 2003 and 2004. The breadth of material in these 2 volumes is astonishing and represents composers from all over the world, and including 10 women. Of particular note in Volume 1 is the Red Lake Mass, adapted by Monty Mason from Francis Dinsmore's Chippewa Music, which explored the music of many Native American nations. Jonathan Dimmick's Missa Appalachia captures the mountain sounds of Jonathan's boyhood. American composer Randall Giles' service music for St. Mary's was written for the historic church of St. Mary's, Madras, India. And of course, the Mass for St. Philip's by William Bradley Roberts. Volume 2 gathered the work of musicians working in Anglican Episcopal churches, from Washington, D.C. to Oklahoma, to Oregon, to British Columbia, to Japan, Puerto Rico, Italy, and Argentina, providing additional Mass settings and a variety of canticles and other service music. This exposure to the practices of various parts of the United States, as well as the Anglican Communion, offers us a chance to know and join with our brothers and sisters in faith as we sing the Church's song. In conclusion, collections of hymns and songs compiled by the Standing Commission from the late 1980s through 2004 were the last compiled by that body to be published. Additional music resources have been published by others, but not at the behest of General Convention through the vision of the Standing Commission. The Commission members have continued to collect a variety of music, but to date, none has been published. Is it possible for the Episcopal Church to sustain its perceived excellence of congregational song without a clear vision and action on the developments that continue to shape our beliefs? Faithful hymn writers and composers partner to embrace clear vision and bring such growing awareness to the lips of people through song. It is a noble work, and must continue. We have considered only the official supplements of the Hymnal 1982. Through them, we can trace the developments of the last 20 to 25 years. Supplements give us the chance to try various expressions and find what best helps us know God more fully, embrace the example of Christ, and grow in the Holy Spirit. This is groundwork for the future. Supplements take the risk to find and make available a broad spectrum of current music, opening its use to the broader church. As the Fred Pratt Green text in Wonder, Love, and Praise says so well, the Church of Christ in every age, beset by change but spirit-led, must claim and test its heritage and keep on rising from the dead. Let's sing that hymn at number 779 in Wonder, Love, and Praise. And I'd like to do all verses. I sat on your book.
Is this? Yes. Thank you. And I'd like to also thank Tom Smith at the organ and John Rapolsky at the piano. Gives you a chance for Tom to show off what this beautiful instrument can do. So we'll have some time for questions. If you have some questions of Bill or Marilyn. Has anybody got a card ready? Oh, yay. Anybody else? Yeah. Hold them up. I love hearing, what? Oh, about, sorry. I love hearing about different areas of burgeoning church music and liturgy, such as Fred Pratt Green and Friends in the 1970s, and the celebration community of the 1990s. What current communities and individuals might inspire the church's next hymnal?
I think for me, that is, well, there are lots of places, but one of them is the global church. They're offering us texts and wonderful rhythms and tunes that are maybe foreign to us, but far more engaging, especially in mission. And so I guess that's what I would say.
And I would say we have only begun to hear from the Latina world. There's tons more material that we have to receive from those. And I think it reminds me of something that, let's see, I think it was David said this morning that for some congregations it's more aspirational than real, isn't it? For us to do Spanish hymns. And my position is, do them anyway. I don't care if there's nobody who speaks Spanish in your congregation. That is the direction of American culture. And if we want to address and be engaged with American culture, we must fully embrace Latina culture, and as well as their music.
Who else? Anybody else? Oh. Are there any plans for any new supplements or revisions of current supplements?
Is Nancy here?
Nancy?
Nancy Brock, Church Publishing?
Yeah, we need it for our.
It's a lot of work just for an I don't know answer. At this point, Church Publishing in and of itself is not planning any work, but whatever comes out of the Standing Commission, of course, will be our honor to support and help work on.
Given the Hymnal 82's emphasis on German chorales, chant, etc., in authentic musicological form, it seems that the same privilege wasn't always afforded African American spirituals, Western harmonies, etc. What am I leaving out? I can't. Yes. Can you speak to that? Got small over there at the end.
So, you know, I suppose if you're going to be really authentic, that we shouldn't be doing spirituals with organ at all, right? If you're going to consider the original milieu from which they came. But we adapt nearly everything that we use, don't we? And if we're going to sing spirituals on a Sunday morning, for most congregations, that's going to require some kind of Western arrangement and some kind of organ or piano accompaniment for most congregations. I studied with Alice Parker, who really does try to get at the heart of the way spirituals were sung in the fields by people who were making them up on the spot. And she seeks to do that in her arrangements so that they sound more polyphonic than harmonic, whereas most of our arrangements, of course, are harmonic, are homophonic. So I would say if you have the resources and the imagination and a congregation that is willing to to take a risk, that it's great to try things in their original form. For most of us, I think we're going to need something that's a hybrid between the original form and something that is like we're accustomed to.
One of the things that Alice Parker likes to say is you've got to sing off the page, which means that don't read just exactly what's on the page, but sing it in the style. And that's one of the things we've not been very good about helping our congregations be free enough to do. Even people who don't read off the page are influenced by those of us who do. The other thing I might point out is, if you remember, Victorian hymnody straightened out an awful lot of rhythm of German chorales, et cetera, et cetera. As we've witnessed, we have a couple of examples in the Hymnal 1982 where it's in the straight rhythm that we all know and love, and then there is the other rhythm that was the way it was sung originally. So in terms of African-American music, that's much of it is folk music. And we have a lot more leeway than we ever take with those hymns. And so I urge you to experiment.
While eventually a new hymnal would be a welcome opportunity, one common argument brought up is that so much is shifting to electronic forms and more music is being printed in the bulletins, thus negating the need for a new hymnal. What are your thoughts?
We're going to have a session on that deals with that specific topic. So I'm not trying to deflect that. I don't want to steal the thunder of that group that talks about it, because we realize that the delivery means of information these days is up for grabs, isn't it? And 10 years from now, who knows what it'll be? Something that we can't even begin to imagine now. So if you don't mind, I think we'll wait until we have the panel of people who are experts in that area.
Considering the length of time given to the Hymnal 82, supplements have been given much less time. Is this healthy, or the new world, or the nature of supplements?
Supplements are meant to be temporary. And they, as I said, they're for the purpose of exploring. They're not to be put in the pews and left there forever. Much of what's in Wonder, Love, and Praise is no longer appropriate or necessary or doesn't speak to people. We knew that would happen when we put it together. And all hymnals have things in them that somebody on the committee didn't want in there. And we had some really interesting, I didn't tell any anecdotes about those supplements because some of them were not repeatable. Well, one of them that we wanted to do was try to figure out what we were going to name this supplement that ended up being Wonder, Love, and Praise. And we kicked around several ideas, and we were going to say, sing, because people weren't singing. Call it sing. And then that turned into sing, expletive. Sing, other expletive. But they're meant to be used for a while. And whatever comes to the surface, if there are any things in there that come to the surface, then perhaps they need to be included in a greater body of songs and hymns. So I'm not sure that I would say we've had inadequate time for the supplements. In fact, I wish we had some more. More supplements.
Yeah.
Yeah, not time.
Bill, do you want to speak to that? Or? Neither of you mentioned My Heart Sings Out. Where does that fit in?
I'd have to look at my list again, but as with about 8 publications that came out from church publishing a number of years ago, My Heart Sings Out was one of those. It did not come through General Convention or the Commission for the reasons that I mentioned about the conventions and the resolutions and the lack of funding and so forth. So Church Publishing felt a need for materials, and we had a proposal received by a woman in the Boston area for a hymnal. It is not a children's hymnal. I want to correct that right now. It is a hymnal for congregations that are intentional about including children in their worship. It is not a hymnal to hand 4-year-olds. And so that's what that book was for. And there have been other collections and materials as well, published, but not through the commission.
One of the stories that Ray Glover has told in my classes when he's come to talk about by the way, I'm very sorry Ray couldn't be here. We hoped that maybe you'd come, and he just was not up to it. So he sends his greetings, and he knows we're all here talking about these things. But Ray says, you might notice that the 1982 hymnal does not have a children's section. Have you noticed that? Previous hymnal did, many denominationals do. And he said the reason that's true is because there are a lot of children's hymns that adults really enjoy singing. And the fear was that if you put them in a section that is marked children's hymns, that's a kiss of death. People are not going to touch them. So you would miss a lot of favorites, especially on All Saints' Day, wouldn't you?
Are there, yes. Given the lack of funding and general support for church music in recent years, how do we reverse this trend in the Episcopal Church?
I don't know. I don't have answers, and it's something I ponder a lot. As my biography says, I'm president-elect of the Hymn Society. When I go to a Hymn Society conference and I meet the musicians and clergy and lay people who are there, they tell me they are in school for church music. And they are getting master's degrees and doctorates and so forth, and their church is supporting them in doing that work. And the Hymn Society is supporting them by offering scholarships to come to the conferences. It's frustrating to me that the Episcopal Church does not have that resource. There are schools where they send musicians, but they are not specifically, in some cases, trained in specifically for the Episcopal Church. Yes, there are seminaries, which is somewhat different, which is still fighting the idea that clergy need to learn something about music, except in places like Virginia Seminary and a couple of others that do actually still have faculty to teach that. So I don't know, something's going to need to change if we're going to make a difference, I think.
I think it's easy, it's too easy to identify a malaise in the Episcopal Church. Come on, that doesn't take any creativity at all, does it? And that includes not only music, but lots of other things. What I think takes far more creativity is to find those places where magical, spiritual things are happening. And you know of places like that, don't you? Nod your head if you agree with me. There are places where extraordinary things are happening in this church, and I think we need to hold those up. On the last day of liturgical music class, I give kind of a charge to my students, and one thing I say is, look, don't be a cynic. It's lazy to be cynical. It takes no energy whatever to be cynical. And I said, besides, we are people who believe in transformation. And if you look at the story of creation in the Bible, what follows chaos? What follows chaos? Creation does. So if we are in a time of chaos, at least one of the possibilities is that there is going to be a time of extraordinary creativity. And I urge all of us to live into that.
All right. We're going to take a little bit of a break and move back to Addison. There is coffee available there, plus the Flamingo, I think, is open if you want some really fancy coffee. And we will convene again over there at 2:45 and have a panel discussion about the developments in musical styles since 1982. See you over there in just a bit.